having me.
Well, being a Sydney police officer in the 80s wasn't much like Miami Vice. There were no designer suits to wear, no designer stubble and no sports cars to get around in, but still plenty of crims to catch. And in a strange way, policing was sometimes more comedy than real-life drama. We're about to meet a former cop who, together with his son, is sharing stories about the best and worst for police at that time. Please welcome ex-cop John Verhoeven, as well as his author son, Paul, to studio. Hello, fellas.
Thank you.
And can I say also, more on top of author, his son is a comedian. So, I mean, it's pretty... You couldn't get much further, could you, from
But
hard,
such good material.
Yeah, from tough copper to comedian.
Well, I just think I would have made a terrible police officer. Like, just catastrophically bad. Because for one thing, I don't... Like, you said... Because at one point, I panicked and didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And I turned to Dad and said, should I become a cop? And your response was...
Definitely not.
Definitely not.
Definitely not.
I just don't have the temperament for it.
No. But I was a nice guy, actually. I was... you know how you've got the good guy and the bad guy?
Yep.
So I was always the nice guy. And you'd work with someone that was...
The bad cop, so to speak.
Yeah.
Was it, a lot of people say the 80s in policing were actually the good old days, and yes, the cops are a bit rough around the edges and they cut a few corners, but they got things done and the crims knew to look out. Is that true?
They did get things done, but it was no laughing matter. It was really, really corrupt, and it was scary. And, you know, it's taken me almost 40 years sort of wanting to tell the story. And then Paul approached me, you know, a few years ago and said, Dad, I'd like to do a book. And I said, well, I don't think there's enough material. And then he said, well, why don't you take some notes? So I bought a leather-bound book and I started taking notes, and boy, oh boy.
Wow, it can just...
Did you have to wait for some people to be dead?
Look, I don't know whether those people are dead.
Oh.
Some may be.
Are you scared then if it was corrupt and if it was a scary time? You're not...
No, not at all.
I am, for the record.
Yes, yes.
I'm terrified.
Yeah.
Whenever Paul and I go out for dinner, he always makes me sit with my back to the street.
To the door.
Yeah.
Did you, when you entered the police academy, did you know sort of what you were getting into, or were you wide-eyed and innocent? Or?
Look, I'm going to say something now that I haven't said, and Paul at this point is going, Dad, you haven't told me this, but a relative of mine was in charge of the fraud squad, and he invited me into the Remington building, which was this amazing edifice where all the big squads were. They were heavy-duty, these guys, and he took me into his office, and all the other guys were looking at, thinking, who's this little uniform guy coming in? And he said, John, he said, if I can give you one bit of advice, if you're going to go out in a big way.
Wow.
Meaning, if you're going to take a quid, don't get sacked for taking a pair of sunglasses.
Oh.
So there was that influence.
Wow.
That was my introduction.
So if you're going to risk being corrupt, make it worth
If you're going to be
worth your
corrupt,
while.
just go
So with
hard.
with all that stuff happening around you then, how did you stay clean?
You can't, if this is a line and there's non-corruption and corruption, you can't be non-corrupt one day, dip your foot into the corruption, and then the next day go, you know what? You can't.
Yeah.
You dip your foot in, you're in for good. The problem with not being corrupt was that you couldn't be trusted by your colleagues.
So were you always 100% clean?
100% down
and
the
then
line.
you knew there were other cops who were 100% the other way?
Yeah. But look, this is not a sort of a... This is kind of a... I'd like the police force in New South Wales today to perhaps look back, as the older police do know, and use it, perhaps even parts of this book, as a what not to do.
Yeah. Well, it's over 30 years ago.
Over
Well,
30
I mean,
years ago.
it's really famous now, the stuff that was going on. We're talking about the Roger Rogerson days. It's very famous.
Yeah, and it's all true. Could I tell you a little story?
We want to hear all the dirty detail.
Well, I can give you... This is a sort of a humorous story, but it'll let you know about how things actually were. So picture early 80s, New Year's Eve. I was working at North Sydney Police Station. Now, you've heard of the term paddy wagon?
Yep.
The big F100s where you put all the baddies in the back? That's the theory of it. So we started at 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve. I was working with an amazing senior police officer, and he was mildly eccentric, which I loved. Yeah. And we get in the paddy wagon, and he says, look, we're going to go to a party. And I thought, yeah, cool. So he turned the radio off. Now, we were the head vehicle for the whole of North Sydney, and we drove across the Harbour Bridge, down Macquarie Street to the Opera House, where there were thousands of people, party goers. He got out, opened up the back of the paddy wagon, invited maybe 10, 15 girls into the back of the wagon. We then headed to a party. And I was thinking, wow, we're off air, answerable to no one. And he said, it's all good. We go to this party. And then we made our way into the party. And at midnight, he took his revolver out and let 6 go into the air.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and then we just came back to North Sydney as though nothing had happened. So that's
And he was a good guy.
He was a great guy. You know, that's an example of, you know, sort of how the mood, the
How loose it
atmosphere.
was.
It
how
was
loose
loose,
Really
loose
loose.
units.
That's the name of the book. I try and keep it in terms of, OK, so you're familiar with Han Solo. I like to adhere to the Han Solo ratio of good to evil. 4/5 like good, 1/5 evil. Just occasionally you'll just kind of kick someone out a window, but otherwise you're pretty good.
Yes.
And that's sort of the kind of policing that we wrote about in the book, and that's I mean, you never kicked anyone out a window.
No.
Great, OK.
I was going to ask, though, we touched on Roger Rogerson, who, of course, is the epitome of the sort of crooked cop. He was very highly decorated. He was obviously incredibly intelligent. Was he really a great cop and a great detective, or was he the whole time basically just knocking off people he didn't like, booting people out the window who he didn't like, arresting people who were rivals to his own criminal interests, or was he actually a good cop turned bad?
Well, I need to sort of preface my answer by saying I never met the guy, and his reputation was preceded him. I do know that back in the late 70s, early 80s at Darlinghurst Police Station, one of the cells operated as a bar.
Oh.
So that was that type of
Convenient.
atmosphere.
Is that a pun?
No.
No, very good.
But,
but he was certainly allegedly involved in the importation of most of the heroin that came into Australia at that time, and all of those big things.
Yeah. Well, you know, he's still alive, so I value my...
Sure. Wow.
I suppose more generally, though, is it... Like they used to say, well, you know, you have to get to know these crims in order to get the intel on what's going on.
True,
He used to always have advanced knowledge of when people were robbing banks, then he'd come in like the cavalry. And is there any truth in that you had that you could be a little bit corrupt and still be a good cop, or once you cross that line?
Look, I worked with certain police that I would regard as, you know, fairly corrupt, but they were really, really great people. You can still be a really nice person, and also they got some really, really good results. I mean, they used to have the consorting squad, and their job... Imagine your daily job is consorting with and hanging out with crims. You know, it has to affect you. So it's a fine line.
I'd like that.
Fascinating.
But you know that people that go deep cover, in the police force we used to call them the dogs, and they'd go deep cover for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then they had to be extricated from this, and their whole psyche, you know, it's full on.
It's extraordinary.
It is fascinating, and Paul's book on his dad's stories and his own is called Loose Units.
I'm
It's
halfway
out
through
now.
Excellent. It is excellent.
Cracking read. John and Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We're checking the latest news headlines right after the break. Plus later, Rowie Dillon shows us how to make a delicious Greek treat. We'll see you soon.
My name is Dasha. I live in Adelaide, but I'm originally from Russia.
Dasha is looking for her perfect man, and she has a move that just might win Nick over.
A little something for you.
Righto, I'm good.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, you look quite fit. You will definitely be able to handle it.
Gee whiz. Oh, wow. Geez, you're strong.